Anytime I go back to old games I love, I do still find myself constantly thinking, ugh, I hate this part, or ugh, I hate this level. Even the best remembered games still have their low points, and the Nintendo 64 can be especially rough in that regard. Back on earlier consoles, platformers had a lot more levels, so if there were certain ones you didn't like, they were at least usually over pretty quick. When it comes to DK64 though, there aren't as many levels due to the cartridge size constraints. Luckily there's no levels that I absolutely hate, but there are definitely some that I'm less excited to go back to than the others. Today I'm going to go over my list of how I think all the levels rank up against each other. This super accurate list will be based on completely objective facts that are mostly made up of my completely subjective opinion. Obviously some may disagree with this list, and that's totally fine, it's just...
"'Cause you're a freaking idiot."
So starting off at the bottom we have Helm, which is definitely the worst level mainly because it's just boring. The first part of the level is basically just a straight line. It does have sections where you switch between the Kongs along the way to try to spice it up a little bit, but that just doesn't do anything for me. I guess it's supposed to give the impression of everyone having to work together to do their part, but overall it's just kinda meh. Then after you get everything activated in the main chamber, you have to do 2 barrel challenges for each Kong. Most of them are relatively quick and inoffensive, but some of them are really annoying. Here's an actual time-lapse of how many times it took me to do this stupid Donkey Kong one after picking this game up for the first time in a few years. It wasn't quite as bad on the other runs I did afterwards, but this was just ridiculous. I hate this Diddy one too because it's basically just luck and these guys run away from you just slightly too fast, which makes it really frustrating. Luckily, since it is random, sometimes you get the right one right away, but still. Both the Tinies are basically the same thing, you just use your twirl to go through the stars. One tip is to make sure you take a second at the entrance and stock up on a few rounds of homing ammo before going in. That does make the 2 gun ones way easier. It may not be the intended way to beat them, but hey, I have no shame. Then after you beat all the challenges, you go in another straight line up until the end. You should most likely have more than enough battle crowns, but if this is your first time playing, hopefully you were smart enough to know that those 2 random coins for playing retro games would be a requirement to beat the game. The rare coin is easy enough, but that Nintendo coin can be a bitch and a half. At least Jetpack gives you a few lives, but nope, Donkey Kong only gives you the 1. You can earn a second life, but even with that, it's still rough. Maybe for people who grew up with an NES and actually played the game, it's not so bad. But original NES is one of the only Nintendo consoles that I never owned. Before I had my Super Nintendo, all we had was Atari, so this is what Donkey Kong looked like for me. We also don't get a boss, but that's fine, I guess, since we grab this key and then go fight the final boss. Next is Galleon, and I'm going to admit that it being so low is sort of unfair to the level itself, as a big part of that is it's just hampered by the low frame rate issues due to being a mainly water level.
Don't forget to bring a towel!
I mean, water levels always sucked, but especially on N64, the console just can't keep up when there's water on screen. Seriously, this has to be some of the laggiest lag in an already kinda laggy game. I'm assuming it's a little bit better on the Wii U version, but I've never played it, so I don't know for sure. So not only does this level slow to a crawl, but it's also home to some really annoying bananas. Climbing this tower as DK can be ridiculously hard sometimes, and I have no idea why. It should be a straightforward climb, but sometimes I just non-stop fall down. This one chunky banana where you have to shoot the cannonball to 3 targets also has really tight timing, and what makes it even worse is that the Kasplat on the platform between the cannonball and the cannon has one of the quickest respawns in the game. So if you lose, which you will, you have to re-kill him again and then grab the cannonball and then make your way back over without dropping it just to try again. We also have this Diddy Fish banana, which may be one of the worst in the game. So you have to fly up to the lighthouse, play your guitar, and then run over and get to this stupid fish and wait for him to open his mouth so you can swim in. Sometimes it just seems like he won't open his mouth. So I don't know if there's a way to actually trigger it or not, or if it's all just RNG. Then the actual objective inside is to break all his heart valves. You can only hit them when the fan has completely stopped, and the timing is not forgiving at all. Like if you miss one cycle of the top ones, you're screwed. And then when you lose, you get booted out and have to go all the way back to the other side of the map just to try again. DK's Kasplat is also really annoying to get in this one. You have to activate a warp pad as Diddy, and then you warp there as DK, and then if you get knocked off, you have to swim back out and re-warp there again. Sometimes luck is just not on my side with this one either. We also have one of the banana fairies that can be super annoying to get. Not only are you dealing with the underwater lag, but also the bars in the way. If I wasn't such an obsessive completionist with this game, I would just skip this fairy, and probably the entire level if I could. So I will admit I do like the aesthetic of this level, and I will give the devs credit for not shoehorning in ice physics over the whole level like they could have. A lot of 2D games had their snowy levels extra slippery just to be an extra pain in the ass. But thankfully someone was smart enough to not do that here. This level was near the end of the game, so part of my dislike is probably due to the difficulty of some of these bananas, and also the fact that until you kill that giant Kasha, you're going to be inundated with falling rocks like every 30 seconds. As a first-time player, this was beyond infuriating, and I didn't even know that I had to find and kill him to make it stop. Even now when I pick the game up, I just try to make my way to him before I do anything else, because until you do, the whole level is just ruined by the constant interruptions. Even with years of muscle memory, when I do go back to this level, some of these bananas are still just really frustrating. The DK Ice Maze one is one of those. Supposedly if you play your drums when you walk in, it stops everything from moving, but I've tried it and it never works for me, so I must be in the wrong spot or something. You lose a whole watermelon every time you touch the sides. So hopefully you headed to Candy already and at least got the third watermelon, otherwise this one is damn near impossible. Also in this same igloo section is this tiny bullseye ground pound one that always gives me trouble too. This is another case of there being an enemy in the way that just respawns way too fast, and if you fail you have to exit and come back in and kill him all over again before you can actually try again. I mean, I guess if you're good enough you could probably do this without even killing him, but since I'm not good enough to do that, I'm just going to assume it's impossible and no one can. We also have the infamous Lanky beetle race. This one used to be one of the hardest in the whole game for me, but over the years I learned the proper strategy, and now I can do this one usually on the first or second try. made a shorts video with my strategy. I'll throw the link in the description for how I beat him, just in case anyone else still can't do this one. So yeah, annoying earthquakes and some really tough objectives make this whole level a real drag. Okay, so I'm sure officially this doesn't count.
Whatever, I do what I want.
This is my list though, so I'm going to combine the island and the lobbies into one, and going to say it does count since it does include golden bananas and blueprints and a few enemies. It's also included on the total screen or the pause menu, so yeah, I'm going to say it counts. As a kid, I would spend a lot of time just running around the island because at the time this was the most epic open world that I'd ever seen. Being able to jump in the jetpack barrel and fly all around the island too was like the coolest thing ever. It was only the next console generation though when GTA 3 came out and just blew this and everything else before it out of the water. With that game you had an entire city that you could run and drive around and kind of do whatever you wanted. But at the time I had no idea what was to come. So nowadays, that charm has definitely faded, and this is just a vast open wasteland that connects the actual levels. Still though, there are things to do and items to collect. Most of the bananas you get aren't too bad. Like some of them, you just play your musical instrument and Squawks will bring you a banana easy peasy. But then there are a few with minigames that do kind of ramp up in the later areas of the game. The Batty Barrel Bandit one up by Snides HQ can be kind of tough since it moves so fast. But once you realize that the order of the reels is the same throughout the whole game, you can just memorize where the bananas are and it makes it way easier. Overall, this is an okay quote-unquote level. It gives you something to do in between the official levels and gives you a sense of progression as you move through the game and unlock more abilities. It's also nice to have some quick side content in between the levels in comparison to, say, Mario 64's castle, which was almost exclusively just a hub with a couple stars but very little else. It definitely feels uninhabited in comparison to more modern games, but since there's nothing overly frustrating about it, I feel like this ranks above a couple of the levels at least. So Japes is the first level, and like most first levels, it's just here to introduce you to the game and act as a little bit of a tutorial. There's nothing bad per se about this level, but there's just better ones to come. This level falls right in the center of the list just because it's average quality overall. I like the jungle theme, and out of all the levels, I do think this is probably the best choice for the first level. It's on the smallish side in comparison to the others, and there isn't too much of a challenge. It's a good way to get your feet wet and learn the basics of the game. This is where you get acquainted with some of the NPC characters as well. We already met Cranky at the very beginning, but we get to see him again here and buy some more abilities. We also run into Funky, who last time I saw him was a surfer pilot dude. But something happened to him and now he's a crazy gun nut.
You goddamn knows what happened!
I remember how crazy it felt being able to buy guns in a Donkey Kong game when I was a kid. From what I've read, originally they were supposed to be more realistic, like Donkey Kong had an actual shotgun and Diddy had dual pistols, but apparently someone at Nintendo said, nah bro, you can't put guns in a Donkey Kong game. So I guess they compromised and added these more cartoonish fruit shooting guns instead. So you start off with just DK, and then you quickly unlock Diddy. You won't be seeing any other Kongs for now until you beat the level and move on to the next ones. I really like the way the game had you progressively unlock the Kongs in the different levels. This way you get a small taste of the levels before you move on to something else. And if you aren't trying to complete everything, you technically don't even have to come back to this level if you don't want to. We also get to turn into Rambi and go full-on bull in a china shop on these huts. It's kind of weird that they programmed him in just for like 2 parts of the actual game and then that one random throwaway bonus minigame, but hey, it's still cool to see him again. We also get our first minecart section as Diddy, which is pretty cool. The minecart levels were a staple of the 2D game, so it's nice to see that they brought them over to the next generation. So yeah, this level is no slouch. It's a great choice for the first level and has some cool throwbacks, but it's just a little lacking compared to some of the other levels we'll get to. Okay, so now we're cooking. We're getting to the top half of the list now. Aztec is a great second level as we gain a lot in this one, and that opens up a lot of different options on how we get to play the game. We left Japes with only 2 Kongs available, and in this one we get to free 2 more. We get Tiny Kong, who becomes a lot more useful after the next level, but she still has her uses here, and we also unfortunately get Lanky Kong. Seriously, I hate Lanky Kong, so I personally would have just left him to rot, but sadly we do need him to complete the game. Not only is our roster getting bigger, but so is the level size. Aztec has 2 main outdoor parts, but within those parts we have different temples we can enter that are a lot bigger than they look.
That's what she said.
That's my joke. Damn it, Dwight.
The large indoor sections add to the aesthetic variety within the level and provide a contrast to the brighter open-air sections. They have sort of a foreboding vibe to them. Especially the 5-door temple later on in the level that plays the "Get out" noise that genuinely used to give me anxiety as a kid. We also get introduced to another of our NPC vendors in this level. Candy Kong sells us musical instruments and watermelons, and was also the source of many a confusing preteen boner back in the day. Seriously, what were they trying to push on us kids back in the 90s? I'm surprised more of us didn't end up growing up to become furries.
You think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
We get a pretty good mixture of the different minigames and challenges in this level also, and there's only 2 that I remember having any major trouble with. The first one is the one where Diddy follows around the vulture in his jetpack. I know I used to have a lot of trouble with this one, but not so much anymore, though I do still fail it occasionally from time to time. The other one though is Tiny's beetle race. This is still one of my least favorite in the entire game. Unlike the race with Lanky, I still don't have a good strategy for this one. I usually try to start off by kicking her, but I don't even know if that really helps that much. Either way, it at least makes me feel good. But yeah, we'll just say 1.5 bad bananas in the entire level. That's not too bad. Coincidentally, the 3rd level is also 3rd place on this list. So technically you can play either Factory or Galleon as your 3rd level since both unlock at the same time. But this is the one that I and most people will probably always play 3rd. Like, why would you subject yourself to Galleon earlier than you have to? Plus, if you play Galleon first, you'd end up having to go back to it anyway since you'd still be missing a Kong. Not just a Kong, the Kong. Chunky is hands down the best Kong in the game.
That is a fact of nature.
So now we have the full crew assembled, and we can complete almost everything in every level from now on the first time we enter it. If this level weren't bogged down by a few negatives, that alone would have made it contender for number 1. I really like the Toy Factory look and the fact that most of the enemies and objectives are themed around toys. The meat of the level is in a few major locations, and then those locations are interconnected by linear hallways that just have collectibles scattered along the way. I also like how the main production room is lifeless when you first go through it, but later on you'll turn it on and activate it, and then it becomes an actual usable area of the game. While I do have some gripes about the production section, mainly how much it sucks if you fall off and have to climb back up again, it again is on point theme-wise. We do unfortunately have a few iffy objectives in this level that hamper the fun a bit. We have our first instance of the infamous beaver bother minigame. This one isn't too bad compared to the later versions, now that I have years of practice. But for a first-timer who doesn't understand the nuances of how you actually try to corral them into the hole, it's probably still pretty rough. We also have the DK arcade game mentioned back in the intro. The first round of it for the golden banana isn't too bad. It's definitely not easy if you've never played retro games like this before, but it's doable. The second one, though, for the mandatory Nintendo coin, though, can be really unforgiving. The fact that they made this a requirement to beat the game and not just for some kind of bonus or bragging rights definitely sucks. And worse yet is the long delay in between tries. You have to wait for the game to end and then wait for the Switch to be pullable again just to have to watch the stupid intro again.
I want to punch you in the face so bad right now.
So yeah, this still is one of my favorite levels, but the DK arcade alone deducts a few points for me. It's a cool retro edition, but come on, they couldn't at least give us one extra life to start? Where's the Konami code when you need it? Castle is a very close runner-up. This is usually the last real level of the game for me. We're again given another choice of which level we want to do first, either Castle or Caves. I usually do Castle last, this way I can wash the bad taste of Caves out of my mouth. So this is another fantastically themed level, and it just feels so huge. There's the main castle itself with a spiral walkway that leads you up to the top, and then there's a bunch of different crypt sections to explore and get the majority of the collectibles. There's a genuine spooky feel in some of the locations, but then they're also broken up by having the Kremlins with a sheet on them as one of the main enemies. The level also seems to be planned out really well. Like, you kind of just follow the colored bananas around as waypoints, and then they lead you to the different main sections of the game where all the golden bananas are. They're grouped together so that certain Kongs are used in certain sections, and then you go on to the next area and use a different set. Since it's the end of the game, we also have all of our abilities, and we get to put them to use. There's a few spots where you use a couple different skills that in the first levels you would have only used one to complete. This level also has my favorite of the minecart races. I think this one's actually the easiest of the three, but it's kind of cool having a sort of boss-like character chasing you the whole time. Like, jumping through the multiple tracks is more engaging than just jumping over fallen trees and stuff. The only questionable decision from the designer side is that they put Beaver Bother twice in this level.
Why?
Because!
It's almost like someone at the very last minute realized, oh shit, this is the final level, it's supposed to be hard. And they were just like, throw Beaver Bother in there a couple times. That alone could have banished Castle to the very bottom of the list, but the rest of what's here is so good that I'm willing to forgive that one misstep.
Drum roll, please. That's your drum roll.
And finally we make it to Fungi, which is undoubtedly the best level. This one starts off the second half of the game, and it's one of the ones I always look forward to the most. And just like the number 2 entry, it's a great palate cleanse to get over the previous crappy level. To be perfectly honest, I can't quite put my finger on what it is that I like most about this level. The mushroom theme isn't really anything special, but this whole world just feels so lively and like there's so much to do. It might be the day and night dynamic, since that lets you switch up the level at any point. In the center of the open section is the giant clock that allows you to switch the time of day, and I may have used that more when I was younger and more unfamiliar with the level. As it is now, I usually only have to change the time twice. I usually need to turn it to nighttime once when I'm initially playing this level, and then a second time when I have to come back for that son of a bitch rabbit race. Most of the objectives can be done either time of day, but there are a few exceptions that need a specific time. I also like how when you change the time, it changes the music and the enemies as well. It doesn't quite feel like two separate levels, but maybe like 1.5? I also think that some of the objectives themselves are just fun. From fighting off some killer tomatoes to save a worm and an apple, then help him move, to planting a beanstalk just so you can fly up and grab the golden banana that it grew somehow. Like, none of it makes any sense, and maybe it is just the randomness of the level that I enjoy so much. We also have one of the only legit mini-bosses in the game, the giant spider. She's not overly difficult, but seeing as most enemies in the game can be killed in one hit, it's cool to have somewhat of a challenge other than the actual bosses. As with the other levels though, not even this one is perfect. I remember this owl chasing banana being really rough for me when I was a kid, even though I can do it now pretty easily. And we also have to do the horrible rabbit race. This is another thing kind of like the DK Arcade, where the first round isn't too bad, but the second one is just really tough. Seriously, even though I'm able to beat him relatively consistently now, I have no real strategy other than trying to pass him at this one exact point. But yeah, no matter how bad the rabbit sucks, that still doesn't take away from Fungi being the best. And since you don't even get the sprint that you need to actually beat him until you move on to Crystal Caves, you could just finish this level getting everything but the Rabbit Race Golden Banana, and then just not come back if you're not doing 101%. Which, in that case, this is a perfect level. So there we go. That's my completely unbiased and scientifically based ranking of the levels. As I stated before, even the worst levels still have their silver lining moments and aren't completely bad, and even the best ones still have their faults. Overall, even with its limited level count, DK64 still had a pretty good variety, and a lot of the level types from the classic 2D games are represented here in glorious 3D for the first time. Anyway, if you disagree, feel free to let me know down in the comments, but otherwise this will go down as the definitive list.
And that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so.